Hey guys, welcome to Mind and Matter Part 2, Percept contra Precept. That title, that word percept merely refers to a thing in the world that is an object of perception. And I'm going to discuss how the problem of perception puts a disparity between a percept and the ability of a human person to form a precept, which is a law or statute for life, or a principle to live by. And we arrived at this last time when we discussed, quote, how does one discern logos, unquote. And the difficulty arose from Marsilio Ficino's exploration of mind and body, and it's not necessarily something he would have realized of himself and mentioned. The problem lies in the fact that he was a humanist. And as a humanist, he would have accepted multiple systems of authority, i.e., Aristotle, Plato, and others, along with scriptural authority, as well as this old antiquarian system of appeals whereby he would appeal to the ideas of the old gods. So, humanists, a big gaggle of contradictions, that. Essentially, we saw the mind and body problem most clearly illustrated in Romans chapter 7 from St. Paul's letter to that Roman church, where St. Paul speaks of how he feels and senses this division between his mind, his inward man, and what that inward man delights in, and the body and its desires and wants, and how it feels like both of those things are disparate. They can't achieve a unified end. The mind works toward an end, and the body works towards an end that St. Paul describes as death. So this difficulty brings into focus an idea that we're going to discuss today, and we're taking a bit of a hundreds of years jump, but I think that this philosopher explains it most clearly and defines just exactly where the problem between mind and body lies. And that person is a German philosopher by the name of Arthur Schopenhauer. He said, quote, "The world is my idea. This is a truth which holds good for everything that lives and knows, though man alone can bring it into reflective and abstract consciousness. If he really does this, he has attained to philosophical wisdom. It then becomes clear and certain to him that what he knows is not a sun and an earth, but only an eye that sees a sun, a hand that feels an earth, that the world which surrounds him is there only as idea," unquote. This is the first page of Schopenhauer's book, The World as Will and Representation. I had planned to read much of this book in preparation for a podcast that our Positive Perspectives team will be doing soon, but in all honesty, this quote alone was enough material to discuss. The sweeping ramifications of this quote, I can't even begin to describe them all. The idea that the world is merely each person's idea. That the world is not formed from matter that can be apprehended outside of the human person, but rather the world is mere conception. And that conception, that concept, that forming of a concept comes through the senses and is therefore corrupted in that process. So the only thing we know for sure is that our eye is there and sees what it sees. We don't know the essential nature of what we see, hear, feel, or taste, or what have you. Rather, all we know is the data that comes to our consciousness. We form an idea of what we see, and there we go. That's the view of the world. I find this very difficult to argue against. Schopenhauer was a famous skeptic for that very reason. You think of the idea of that meme, where in the top left there is data. It's all of these dots that are disconnected. You then have knowledge, have information where data points are connected. Then you have knowledge, where even more data points are connected into unified systems. And then you have wisdom, where all of the data works as a cohesive whole. That, however, is not something Schopenhauer would agree to. This quote basically leaves us in that top left quadrant of the meme. It leaves us in the world of data. All we have is what we can perceive empirically. So, that is the essence of the problem of mind and body. That problem is a problem of perception. Just to give an example of how much this new idea about idea affected European society, just take art for a second. The Impressionistic school of art was formulated on the concept that when an artist looks at a landscape, if you will, he is not, or she is not, rendering that literal landscape. That artist is rendering an image that is presented in their mind. And that image is their conception of whatever reality is in front of them. I mean, one considers, would Raphael paint the Florentine city the same way as Da Vinci or Michelangelo? And oftentimes we would have to say no. There would be differences. A color would be changed here. A hue would be changed there. A light structure, the chiaroscuro, would be changed there. And that's only in Renaissance art. You continue further into the Impressionistic schools of Monet and others, Van Gogh, and all of a sudden you have perception on full bridal display. One needs only look at this painting here in the background, which I will cite at the end of the video and give credit to the artist, and you could come up with many things that this is. Maybe it is a tree branch with the blue outlining it in the background. Or maybe it is a branch floating down a river with water lilies in the background. Or maybe it's fire catching in a green field. It's quite impossible to tell. Or maybe this is a shark swimming away from an oil spill. We really have no way of knowing what exactly this is. Maybe the only person who knows is the artist, the person who formed the concept of the idea through their sensory data in their head. So that is one way of many that the problem of perception makes itself known. And we can find that it affects many other things, and we can discover this through doing a simple thought experiment. Take two logicians, logician A and logician B. Logician A sets down a proposition and says sex expresses love. Logician B assents to this proposition. Then the next proposition logician A sets down is sex is of some transcendent good to the whole person. Logician B finds no problem with this and also assents. Then the third proposition of logician A, the person states sex must be enjoyed because it is in fact good. So then, yet again, logician B assents. All of this seems, pretty correct. But then we have conclusion X. There should be no limit on its enjoyment because it's good, it's enjoyable. And then logician B says, whoa, wait. Conclusion Y. A limit to enjoyment must exist inasmuch as bodily function receives detriment. This brings into view the role of data. Each of these people come to these conclusions on propositions that they both agreed to all along the line, and perhaps also unknown data in the equation that is unknown to either of them, perhaps some presuppositions in there as well. But all of these presuppositions, from the Schopenhauerian perspective, may be formed on true experience, true data. And that data is true for them. And perhaps the data of bodily function being deterred from unbridled sexual enjoyment means nothing to logician A. Perhaps that is not something that matters from logician A's perspective. Therefore, that data doesn't need to be included in the equation. Or from logician B's perspective, perhaps the body is the true emphasis here, not the mind. To the mind of logician A, sex is a great pleasure. To the body of logician B, the joy that it brings the mind matters not, but rather the damage that might be done to human physical flourishing. So here we have two people who come to true conclusions based upon true experiential data, but they do not agree. And who's to say who's right and who's wrong? There's really no room to make a conclusion here, or maybe there is. I would love it if you'd help me figure that out. So, food for thought. And this brings us to our idea. Precept contra percept. How do we form grounded precepts if the data transferred to the mind founds everything upon perceptual experience? A founding which may greatly vary person to person. We want to form precepts whereby we may live our lives in common towards a common good. That is one way of conceiving of the Heraclitean logos, a common structure, a common system, assented to by all, to which all might listen and find a way to live their lives. Yet, the problem of perception enters, and answering back to it and telling it it's wrong seems to be exceedingly difficult. So, we will continue to consider this and consider possible solutions in part 3 of the series. Thank you for listening.